All right, folks, we're back in the FITSNews studio for another edition of Your Week in Review. A ton of stuff to cover. We've got a big update on the saga of Jeroid J. Price, the convicted killer and gang leader whose illegal release from the custody of the South Carolina Department of Corrections has created a political and judicial firestorm in South Carolina. We're going to bring you the latest on that case, including the fact that this convicted killer is on the run from authorities as we tape this show. We're also going to bring you a big update on the Murdaugh story. We've got the latest batch of love letters sent to Alec Murdaugh in his undisclosed location within the Department of Corrections. Jen Wood and I are going to sit down and go through some of those interesting bits of correspondence. We're also going to give you a little bit of an insight into a big problem currently staring down South Carolina on the healthcare front. I'm talking about an obesity epidemic that is crippling this state and could pose some serious costs on healthcare consumers in the years to come. We're going to talk to an expert on that issue. All that and more heading your way on the Week in Review. All right, so obviously the big story this week, the escalation of the story of Jeroid J. Price, the convicted killer gang leader whose illegitimate, illegal, and unconstitutional release from the South Carolina correctional system last month has created a firestorm of controversy, not only for the South Carolina court system, but also for the lawyer legislators who appoint South Carolina's judges and justices. Now, this news outlet first reported on Price's release, which was engineered via a backroom deal between his attorney, powerful legislator Todd Rutherford, and Circuit Court Judge Casey Manning. This was one of Casey Manning's last acts prior to retiring from office. But this secret deal, which was under a court seal, which was not properly filed or stamped as a motion before the court, it was literally done under cover of darkness. A deal between this powerful attorney and this judge, both of whom, by the way, have a history of enabling corruption in South Carolina. This deal freed a gang leader, someone who had, according to correction sources, ordered 2 hits on correctional wardens. In fact, they had to move him to a prison in New Mexico as a result of this. And in fact, that's where he was at the time of his extra-legal and unconstitutional release. Now, we covered a lot of this in our last episode, and we've covered a lot of this over the last few days on FITSNews. But this week, at long last, there was a hearing before the South Carolina Supreme Court. Again, the entity which has enabled a lot of this judicial corruption over the years, people. There was a hearing before the court as to whether or not Price's release should be voided and whether or not he should be remanded back to the custody of the South Carolina Department of Corrections. Frankly, this guy never should have been let out. He was let out with 15 years on his sentence for a gang murder, okay? A mandatory minimum sentence. No way he should have been out. But there was a court hearing as to whether or not he should be remanded back to the custody of the Department of Corrections. And by a very narrow 3-2 vote, the court ruled that yes, he should be. They voided his release, again, which is what they should have done. And they ordered that he be picked up and brought back to the South Carolina Department of Corrections. Now, there's a little problem with that. The problem with that is that this gang leader, Jeroid Price, has had a little bit of time to make some moves. And sure enough, on the day this ruling was issued, after police had been following and watching his movements, Price ditched the trail. In fact, he ditched the trail a day or two earlier in Charlotte, North Carolina, according to our sources. He had been in Richland County, South Carolina, as this news outlet reported. In fact, he'd gotten a haircut, went to see a lady friend, apparently. Doing whatever escaped gang, or not escape, but illegally released gang leaders do, right? So here's where we are, and this is a key point I want to bring up. Days before this court hearing, on April 21, Attorney General Alan Wilson wrote a letter to Chief Justice Donald Beatty. And this is in addition to the AG's office filing a writ of prohibition which sought to put Price back in jail while police knew where he was, that sought to have him picked up and held prior to the hearing. But in addition to that formal paper, Attorney General Wilson sent a letter to Justice Beatty. We got a copy of it right here. Right here. We exclusively reported on this yesterday on FITSNews. But this letter points out very specifically that the AG is very concerned that Price is not under any sort of bond or any restrictions on his movements, anything requiring his presence in South Carolina, and that he is a danger to the community and a flight risk right there, which is exactly what happened. But this was in the hands of Chief Justice Beatty days before the hearing on Jeroid Price's, again, illegal, unconstitutional release. And I keep using those terms, and some people have challenged those. Well, let me be clear. The South Carolina Constitution affords crime victims the right to not only be heard, the right to not only be aware of a convicted killer's release, but the right to appear at a hearing and share why they believe that convicted killer should or should not be released. That's in the Constitution. That's not just a law. That's in the state Constitution. None of that happened in this case. None of that happened. And I call it illegal because, again, the South Carolina Code of Law specifically states that if you are convicted of murder in South Carolina under this mandatory minimum sentence, which is what Price was convicted for in December of 2003, after he brutally murdered a University of North Carolina football player at Club Voodoo in Columbia, South Carolina. If you are sentenced under that statute, you have to serve day for day, every day of that sentence, which means he should not have been released until 2038. He's out now, folks. But I want to talk for a minute about, because the real travesty here isn't the fact that this killer is on the streets. The real travesty is the system which put him back on the streets. And I want to talk about that briefly. Because during the hearing, the two justices who voted against apprehending or attempting to apprehend Price, who said he should remain free, they made some interesting comments that I think are very telling about the system. And the first comment I want to draw your attention to is from Chief Justice Donald Beatty, who basically tried to put the blame for this on prosecutors. Let's cut to that clip.
Well, Mr. Wilson, we don't argue with you about the statute. We're looking for you to give us some authority to do what you're asking us to do. All you're doing is just saying this is a bad thing. Do something about it. That's a mess that y'all made, and you're asking us to clean it up without giving us grounds to clean it up.
It is unconscionable for him to say that this is somehow the state's fault. It is. He's half right. It is the state's fault. But for him to attempt to pin all of this on prosecutors when it was his judge who did this, who was the driving force behind this, not the prosecutors. Although, again, I'm very concerned about Fifth Circuit Solicitor Byron Gibson's role in this, very concerned. But it was ultimately the judge's call. So for the Chief Justice of this court, of this entire state, to make that sort of a claim, it shows you exactly where his head is. And it is, frankly, not where it needs to be, which is public safety, which is the rights of victims, which is the fundamental fairness of what's supposed to be a system of justice. Unfortunately, in this state, it's not a system of justice. It is an annex, a political annex of a corrupt legislative branch of government. But again, let's get into that now. I want to talk about that because there was another comment during this hearing from another justice. His name is Buck James from Sumter, South Carolina. He's one of the newer justices on the court. But Buck James decided during this big hearing earlier this week that it was his job to stand up and defend South Carolina's lawyer legislators and this corrupt system. Let's listen to what he had to say.
More fundamental question. Is Mr. Rutherford's status as a lawyer legislator relevant to any legal or procedural defects that you have argued?
I'm not making what he does professionally an issue in this case, this specific case.
Because it seems to me that that has been a driving factor in forums other than one here today. But he didn't exert any undue influence over Mr. Gibson, did he?
There is no evidence in the record that I've seen that he has, as the record I have right now, Your Honor. But again, the secrecy of this whole thing makes people look at this with great skepticism.
But the lawyer-legislator angle, you agree, is wholly irrelevant.
But in this court, it's all about the law, Your Honor.
All about the law. I just want to be clear on that. Thank you.
All right, so James says that the lawyer-legislator angle here is wholly irrelevant? What in the world is this guy talking about? What planet is this justice on, people? A powerful lawyer legislator convinces a state judge to let a convicted gang leader out. But hey, let's not talk about the system here. Let's ignore the fact that this is the guy, the one guy, Todd Rutherford. He's on the Judicial Merit Selection Committee here in South Carolina, which is the panel that picks the judges. And they're the ones that keep judges off the bench. So basically, you know what this guy's basically saying? He's saying, please, Representative Rutherford, remember me when I come up before your panel next time. Remember that I had your back during that court hearing. It's disgusting, people. I don't know what to be more pissed off about, the fact that this convicted killer's on the street or the fact that our justices are standing up for the corrupt system that put him back out there. Anyway, I'm a little fired up about this, as you can't tell, because this is something our news outlet has been leading on, has been pushing in the public arena, at a debate we have been fighting for years. And this is why. Crap like this is why. This is why we push for these reforms. And I do want to say a few words of crediting some people, because again, this story has blown up in a way that a lot of stories that we've previously covered have not blown up. Okay, there's a lot, this happens all the time in South Carolina, but for once, people are paying attention. So I do want to credit some folks. The mainstream press, they've done a great job on this story. They have covered this the way they should. For once, they are finally paying attention the way that they should have been for years. But hey, we're glad they're here. A lot of eyes, a lot of ears on this story. So everyone who's covering this, whether in print, whether on TV, whether on podcasts, credit. You guys are doing the Lord's work on this. Now, I also want to credit a couple of state lawmakers, 2 freshman lawmakers, Joe White from Newberry and Heather Bauer from Columbia, both of whom are advancing judicial reforms that, frankly, should have been passed a long time ago. Now, are they advancing the level of reforms we need? Well, not necessarily, but it is a beginning of a conversation within the General Assembly. And folks, those bills have got a ton of sponsors as a result of this. We're talking dozens of state lawmakers for the first time going on the record saying the system is broken, we need to fix it. Are they proposing the level fix that we need? I don't think so. I think we need to go much more fundamental in reforming the way that judges are chosen in South Carolina. If you go to FITSNews, we had a story just this past week on what that method should be. Letting governors appoint them, letting non-lawyer legislators advise and consent, and then having the public, giving the public the opportunity to have a recall election or a retention election, or both, so that there's some public accountability when judges make decisions like this. Now, as this story moves forward, I want you to count on FITSNews not only to cover what's happening with Jeroid Price, hopefully getting him back behind bars, but more importantly, what is happening to fix the system that let him out in the first place. You can count on us to do that. All right, for this next segment, we are back to Murdaugh's. And I got to say, I'm sitting here with Jen Wood, our research director. Jen, I miss our Murdaugh shoots. I miss sitting with you outside the Colleton County Courthouse. Like,
There's
seriously.
so many more trials coming up. I'm sure we'll do it again.
Memories. But thank you for taking the time today, Jen. Your FOIA on the Alec Murdaugh jailhouse love letters. I guess they're not really love letters anymore. We've got some jailhouse stalking going on. I mean, what the heck is up with this latest batch?
Oh, whew. That's a whole lot of wow. I guess that's all I have is wow.
A whole lot of wow. Well, let's dive in a little bit. I was reminded of the line from Wedding Crashers about stage 5 clingers when I was reading some of these messages. Like, what? Like this one lady, I think I'm becoming obsessed with you. What the hell?
Yeah.
Jen.
And when he, I mean, I haven't seen any responses from him. And when he doesn't respond, poor Danielle goes off the deep end.
Yeah, like...
I went through hell setting this account up.
Yeah, she's not the only one. You've got this other woman, Kristen, sends him multiple messages over a period of days, and he doesn't respond. She's like, why are you ignoring me? I mean, what in the world? I mean, there's got to be something fundamentally wrong with people who send these in the first place. So I guess it stands to reason that when they become clingery, we shouldn't be surprised, right?
Yeah, I mean, he's not even responding, so I don't know what they're clinging to other than, Whew, holy moly. But, it looks like he is getting money in his canteen account from some of these people. So he
No
is
worries on
able
the beef
to,
sticks front.
right, he can get his beef sticks at the commissary. But yeah, I mean, just so many people that just want to talk to Alex.
Are you surprised? I mean, obviously, the first round of FOIAs you got a couple weeks ago, and we saw sort of a sprinkling of these messages, but it's definitely ramping up in the second round of FOIAs. Jen, does this surprise you?
I mean, I know that this happens. I've seen letters written to, Ted Bundy and Scott Peterson in California. So yeah, I don't know that I'm surprised. I don't think that Alex is as good looking as Scott Peterson.
I was about to say,
Bundy
they're all evil people, obviously, but those were at least handsome evil people. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, hard to describe, but at least you can see the attract, like why somebody might be physically attracted to somebody. But Alex, I'm not getting it. Maybe it's the power.
According to 23-year-old Brooke from Virginia, though, he is handsome. She clearly thinks he's good looking, but it's just crazy to read some of these messages. And one of the things you pointed out, there's no response as of yet from Alec Murdaugh, at least that we can track. Obviously, if Alec Murdaugh were to decide to write a letter to some of these women who've sent him their addresses, we wouldn't.
And men.
We wouldn't know about that, and I understand that. I mean, but let me ask you this question, Jen. Though this has been kind of on my mind because a few folks, not a lot, but a few have questioned whether or not we should be publishing these exchanges, that Murdaugh should have a right to privacy. I mean, what's your comeback to that criticism?
He lost his right to privacy when he was convicted of murdering his wife and child. I mean, it's getting clicks. People are clearly interested in it, whether or not they're outraged by it. So, I don't think he has a right to privacy anymore. That's just how the cookie crumbles, buddy.
Fair enough. The other interesting thing is you read through these messages, there are a ton of folks who are firmly convinced that he did not do it, that he's innocent. In fact, there was this one lady, this woman from Virginia, I believe her name is Sandra Lewis, from Chesapeake, Virginia. She describes herself as an independent homicide consultant. And
Yes, I saw that one.
Yeah, according to her, she normally only assists law enforcement agencies, but she's making a special exception for Alec Murdaugh because, according to her, and I quote, "I feel certain you did not murder Maggie and Paul." Your thoughts on Ms.
Was
Lewis
she
and her
watching the
offer?
same? Was she watching the same trial as us? I mean, the evidence was circumstantial, highly. But the video taken on Paul's phone put him at the crime scene when the murders occurred. So whether or not he actually pulled the trigger, I don't think we're ever going to know. But a jury found enough evidence to convict him. So
I mean, he was there. He lied about being there, and then when he had an opportunity to come clean about the lie, he lied again. I mean, and was caught in that lie on the stand. So yeah, I mean, did they prove conclusively he did it? But they certainly proved he at least knows who did. Or
exactly. I mean, I do think it is an interesting case to dig into forensically and investigatively. I can see how that would appeal to an investigator or specialist, but I'm not entirely sure they're going to find any evidence that is exculpatory.
Right. I agree completely. And in fact, that's the other point. You raise a good point there. They may not have necessarily forensically proven that Alec Murdaugh did it. Came as close as you can get, obviously, in a circumstantial case. But there's been nothing from the defense. In fact, their efforts to portray these alternate theories, the 12-year-old shooters, et cetera, were laughable. laughable.
Yeah.
And again, I want to bring this back. I want to get back to these letters here in a minute, but Jen, that goes back to just how important it is to study these sealed crime scene photos. Again, we're not supposed to have them, and we're obviously not releasing them, but it's so important to understanding the case because that jury, everyone's like, how did they come back so quickly with this verdict? Well, they saw the evidence, and it was clearly
Right.
in line with what the prosecution's saying, not these theories the defense was putting forward.
Right. I mean, I think any doubt that I had that when I was on the fence about whether or not they had enough to convict him, that was alleviated when I saw those pictures because it was very clear that the theories that the defense were putting forward were not plausible based on the photos.
Absolutely not plausible. That's right. Speaking of these letters, though, of these core communications out Murdaugh's getting, there were a few in here from the media. One of them from a digital content producer out of WTOC in Savannah, Paige Phillips, and she, interestingly enough, is offering Murdaugh the opportunity to frame the legacy of his victims. Talk about how you want Maggie and Paul to be remembered. Did that strike you as an interesting angle?
It absolutely is an interesting angle because, even throughout the trial, we did hear some about Maggie, but we didn't, we got a better sense of who she was. But it would be interesting to hear more from Alex about who they were other than Mags and Pawpaw.
So you don't mind that line of inquiry from this reporter?
I think it's all interesting.
Well, we have not sent Alec Murdaugh anything at this point, asking him to talk or to share or whatever. I'm not saying we won't. And again, let's not lie. I mean, any reporter offered the opportunity to speak to him is going to take it.
Right. I mean, if he were to say, I want to talk to the press today and I want to talk to you, I'd be on my way to South Carolina.
Yeah.
I mean,
Now, obviously. Oh, go ahead.
I mean, regardless of what I think, I absolutely would take an opportunity to speak with him, and I know you would too.
We would, and again, the rule in South Carolina, though, is inmates at the State Department of Corrections are not allowed to give interviews under any form, any format, and certainly they can write letters, they can exchange their thoughts with people that way, but they are prohibited from doing interviews with the press. That is verboten. But certainly we are getting a glimpse of what people want to talk about with Alec Murdaugh with these ones.
Yeah. That's interesting too, what people, what approach other reporters would like to take and, what admirers of his want to know. Yeah. I mean, it's all interesting.
Interesting, depressing, disturbing in some cases. I like particularly the one woman who is a veteran of the Massachusetts penal system who told Alec Murdaugh that she was a lookalike for Jessica Biel. That's why he should interact with her. So you got just unbelievable stuff. And then you've got this one woman telling him that she's the best looking of the women that are reaching out to him and that he should avoid all the other women because they just want fame and money.
Right.
They don't have
And
his best interests.
She's not like the other women.
Not like the others at all, of course. Well, Jen, also we look through these records. They show Murdaugh making 65 or attempting to make 65 phone calls. And apparently only 16 of those went through. The vast
I
majority.
was impressed that some actually did go through.
Yeah.
I mean, because last time I don't believe maybe one got through. There were some calls not accepted.
A lot of them.
Yeah. So
17 calls not accepted. Yeah.
Yes, somebody's hitting that no thank you button.
I wonder if that's Buster Murdaugh. Do you think that's who it was?
Buster, or maybe Randy. I mean, Randy seemed pretty like he had some interesting opinions in that interview he did.
It is quite a dichotomy, isn't it? You've got all these people wanting to talk to Alec Murdaugh, and yet you've got clearly a number of people that don't want him calling them.
Right.
Weird dichotomy there. Anyway.
strange
Jen
thing.
Wood, as always, incredible work on these Freedom of Information Act requests. We're getting a window into this fandom for Alec Murdaugh, this crazy culture, hybristophilia, call it whatever you want, but just can't thank you enough, Jen, for your work getting these documents from the Department of Corrections and letting our readers read them and make up their own minds.
As always, it's a pleasure.
Jen Wood, everybody, thanks, and we'll be back again. By the way, also, if you haven't seen it on FITSNews, we've got a big story up this week. We exclusively reported last week on the latest income tax charges against Alec Murdaugh, but Jen Wood has a feature report detailing that indictment, the latest indictment, bringing his charges on the financial front, 101 different
101.
indictments. Unbelievable.
Yep,
Jen
and that's
Wood. So
just through the state grand jury, so there's...
just the financial crimes.
Right.
And Jen, we had a status conference last week. They said they're looking for possibly October.
Yep, October. Corey Fleming, the co-conspirator, alleged co-conspirator, he's going to trial September 11th, and it's scheduled for 2 weeks in Beaufort.
Well, Jen Wood, thanks again for your incredible work on this. Keep it tuned to FITSNews for the very latest on the Murdaugh murders, crime, and corruption saga. The double homicide trial is over. Murdaugh's convicted, sentenced to life in prison. But the story isn't over, folks. There are a ton of cases out there and obviously a ton of lingering interest in this story. Thank you, Jen Wood, for all your work on this story. All right, so a lot of times those in my line of work get accused of chasing headlines, but at FITSNews, we believe in our readers eating their vegetables. And I want to talk about that literally now as it relates to the state of South Carolina's healthcare. A few weeks ago, I had the opportunity to conduct a phone interview with Dr. Mark Antonetti at Lexington Medical Center here in the Midlands region of South Carolina. Now, I'm not scared often or frightened often, but some of the stuff that I discussed with Dr. Antonetti on that call was truly frightening as it relates to an epidemic of obesity that is particularly pronounced here in South Carolina and particularly pronounced as it relates to the children of our state. It's incredibly, incredibly troubling, tragic, and it's about to set us up for a disaster in our healthcare system. I sat down with Dr. Antonetti this week in his offices at Lexington Medical to get a little more info on this epidemic, which is, again, approaching critical dimensions here in the Palmetto State. Here's an excerpt from that conversation. Well, Dr. Antonetti, I want to thank you for joining us. Obviously, we had a conversation the other day for a story that appeared on our website earlier this month about the obesity epidemic across the country, but also particularly here in South Carolina. And I wanted to tell you, I cover a lot of crazy stuff, a lot of frightening stuff. I don't get scared very often, but some of the numbers, the trends, and the costs that you laid out were a little frightening.
Well, certainly the numbers are they are alarming. It's something that's not going away, and it's really a silent epidemic that people really aren't talking about and really poorly understand the coming tidal wave of effects on our society.
Well, let me ask you, before we get into some of those numbers, how do we define this? What are we talking about? What is obesity? How do we measure it? How do we know if we have it?
So typically obesity is defined by BMI. BMI is just a measure of weight, ratio of weight to height. So it lets us compare people of different heights and weights. If you're 6 feet tall and 300 pounds, it's different than if you're 5 feet tall and 300 pounds. So weight is not the absolute measure. So BMI is defined as its mass in kilograms over surface area in meters squared. So it just basically produces a round number. So normal BMI is 25, basically. That's the cutoff. Between 25 and 30, you're considered overweight. BMI of 30 to 35 is obese, and then over 35, we start getting various categories of morbidly obese patients.
So as we look at those numbers here in South Carolina, how do we measure up? Obviously, the report from earlier this month that we talked about, not good in terms of our municipalities. How do we as a state stack up, though?
Typically, South Carolina is always in the top 15 states in terms of percentage of population with obesity. Typically, we're 32 to 35% of our population is obese. Some of our counties, Allendale County particularly, is 46% obesity. Across the country, though, if you look at all adults, most recent data shows about 42% of U.S. adults are obese.
Has it always been this bad? Is this?
No, it's getting progressively worse rapidly. Changes in our society, different types of jobs, different levels of activity have really caused this epidemic to accelerate. So we've seen about a doubling in the obesity rate from 1999, 2000 to about to 2022.
A doubling.
Doubling.
In
yes.
the last
25 to 30 years over that time period, depending on which stats you use. But yeah, it's about doubled. So I mean, it's across all socioeconomic strata. It's across all races, ethnicities. We've seen it just as a population, and even across the world, it's really a problem. There are more people with obesity in the world than there are malnourished people in the world. With the exception of some areas in Africa, it's across all societies to various degrees.
All right, I want to thank Dr. Antonetti for sitting down with us. This guy was actually incredibly cool. In addition to talking about South Carolina's healthcare challenges, we also discussed a good bit of political stuff and some sports stuff. He's a hockey fan like I am, so we're looking forward to having him back on camera again very soon as we continue to expand our healthcare coverage. But I want to thank him for sitting down, and thanks for checking out that important look at South Carolina's obesity epidemic. All right, that's a wrap for this week's episode. I want to thank everybody for tuning in. Obviously, we're going to keep very close tabs on the Jeroid Price story. In the event he is taken into custody, we will be the first to let our readers know. Also want to make sure you keep tabs on our Palmetto Political Stock Index. We have an interview that we think you're going to be very interested on that front coming very soon, so keep your eyes out for that. But the 2024 South Carolina political world is on fire right now as the presidential primary is heating up and as the battle for the heart and soul of the Republican Party continues to unfold here in the Palmetto State. Keep it tuned to FITSNews for your very latest political news as we keep you covered on that front. Thanks for tuning in. We will check you next week.